We're back live in the Trustmark Studios, and I thank you, Valena Beety. She is the Deputy Director of the Academy for Justice and also author of Manifesting Justice, Wrongly Convicted Women Reclaim Their Right. And in the studio, it's Renee Moore-Smith, who is a volunteer and has done a lot of work over with, I guess, the correctional facilities in the state. Just go over visiting, and what does a volunteer do there?
I have a sewing ministry. At CMCL.
Very good.
And
very good.
We do a lot of community work, community service work, and it helps to turn the hearts of the inmates and give them an opportunity to give back. So it's a really the forensics
the forensic pathologist on this, the doctor, the one in question, he passed away when, a couple of years ago, or when was that he passed away?
It was last year, I believe.
Last year. Dr. Leroy Reddick performed the autopsy and concluded the cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head. The manner of death was ruled a homicide, and she was indicted for capital felony murder. Valena, I want to ask you this, is what happened during the appeal process? Because this came after his admission that he had made a mistake, and said that it was not a homicide, it was accidental. Take us to that part of it. And you would think that this was been an open and closed case here, but take us through that. Can you hear me?
I don't.
Perez, is she still there?
Yes, I am still here. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Great. So, we not only had Dr. Riddick, we had other scientists and scientific experts and doctors who also testified that this wasn't a shaken baby syndrome death, and that this child died accidentally from having these seizures and having this shortfall. And that was all presented to a trial judge down in Harrison County. But he ultimately decided that he didn't think that evidence would convince a jury to come to a different result. He didn't think there was enough evidence there. And now we've talked to some of those jurors who have said they would not have voted to convict if they had known about Dr. Riddick's changed opinion.
Yeah, I'm interested in. I'm just fascinated that he wouldn't at least understand or weigh the weight of the doctor actually saying that he thought it was accidental. That did not matter to him, or he just felt like maybe the jury wouldn't buy it.
I think the latter. He just found that Dr. Riddick's testimony at trial was very convincing, and nothing had changed his mind about that. He just wasn't convinced that he should take that big step, because it's a very big step to reverse a conviction. It is so difficult to reverse a conviction. So we're talking about something very, very big here, and he just wasn't ready to make that step.
This whole thing is about probably 30 or 40 pages long, and I noticed somewhere in there reading this last night, at one point, Dr. Reddick said something about the injuries could have happened during an accident on the way to the hospital, but there was no accident. So did that kind of mar the reputation or some of the testimony of the doctor?
It did. So we did a deposition of Dr. Riddick before the hearing where we were talking to him and the prosecutors were talking to him, and no one had talked to him before about this case. Like, we hadn't talked with him and sat down and been like, what do you think? And I thought the prosecution was going to do that, but the prosecution hadn't sat down with him, been like, so what do you think? So he shows up, and he'd looked at his whole case file, and this child had a car accident about a year earlier, and so he conflated that in that moment. But by the time we were before the trial judge, he had reviewed everything, and he was very clear, without even thinking about that car accident, he was very clear that this child's death was not a murder.
Is Honey the mother or the mother-in-law? I was a little confused on that one.
That's the grandmother. It's,
their grandmother, okay. She mentioned in here 4 weeks prior to Brian's death, and this is mentioned in this deposition more than once. She noticed the bottom portion of the whites of his eyes were blood red, but this was something that was happening over a period of weeks or maybe even months. That related to maybe the seizures themselves. Was that taken into consideration or some validation that this child had some aneurysm problems prior to this?
You know, she testified about that before the jury, and the dad also briefly said, yes, this child had been having these petit mal seizures, but if you ask the jurors, they don't remember any of that. What they remember is both the defense and the prosecution agreed and put on experts that said this child died from shaking and from shaken baby syndrome. That's what they remember. And that was the key argument, but that's how this child died, and the defense was simply saying, yeah, the child died from shaking, but it was someone else. It wasn't Tasha.
Yeah. Has she talked to you about this, Renee? Has she anything that we don't know about this that she's spoken to you about?
Well, I know her on a personal level because I'm a volunteer there. And one thing that I can share is that she's still very emotional about it. She said, I haven't even had time to grieve the loss of my stepson. Everyone's been busy pointing the finger at me about something that I didn't do. And if anyone were to meet Tasha, you see this bright light, and that is not what you normally see inside the prison. You know, there's just a sweetness, there's an innocence about her. And as far as details of the case, you know, we haven't talked other than her just telling me I didn't do it. And I've done a lot of research myself. I was so intrigued by, after I met her, I just decided to look into the case. I didn't know Valena. I didn't know anyone. I was just curious. And so when I dug into it, I was just shocked. You know, just the her being 4'9" and the baby weighing 33 pounds, and them saying that she violently shook him to death. It just doesn't. That alone is a lot. But you know, I went to the Attorney General's office. I laid out the case there. I've written to them for a year. You know, I've had no response.
And you're just asking for a new trial?
Just asking for them to look into it. Yeah. I mean, it's. You know,
I don't want to spend a lot of time on one subject here because we're going to be out of time. Let me ask Valena this: when you look at the manner of the injuries that ultimately caused death, and it's only 16 inches from the top of his bed or the mattress itself, 16 inches to the floor, and the floor is carpeted. I think they said it had shag carpeting. Does that put some doubt in your mind how those injuries could have happened at just 16 inches, even if you're standing up? Or do you believe that those injuries correspond to what actually happened?
It's a combination of things for this child. I mean, would my child have had, a death? Would my child have died from that kind of fall? Maybe not. We do know that those falls cause injuries, but this child was particularly susceptible. This child had a seizure disorder, had asthma, and so that kind of fall combined with having this seizure and having difficulty breathing already, this child wasn't getting oxygen. And even though Tasha did CPR, her husband came home and did CPR. In the car, the police jumped in and did CPR. You know, everyone's trying to revive this child, and he's just not able to get oxygen.
Dr. Kenneth, is it Monsoon or Monson? I'm not sure. Testified.
Monson. Mm-hmm.
Monson.
Yeah.
Testified for Shelby as an expert in the field of biochemical engineering, and testified that literature shows that these children are very seldom injured seriously from a household fall. But speak to that, exactly what he said and how that came out.
Yeah, so at the time of trial, we didn't think that short falls could cause really damage to children. And now we know that children can tragically die from short falls. Now, that's particularly important where we have a child who already has this seizure disorder and is already fragile, frankly. So here, it's really, you have to look at all of it, that there was this shortfall as well as the seizure happening for this child. And, he also testified about how a woman who was Tasha's size just could not have shaken a 2.5-year-old child who weighed 33 pounds, could not have shaken that child hard enough to have caused these kinds of injuries and to cause the brain injuries. And now we know, again, that lack of oxygen, a bump on the head, can cause some of these brain injuries that we're seeing.
Has in any of this deliberations or speaking with her, she's open to a polygraph test now? This far out, I'm not sure.
Oh, absolutely.
She has offered that?
One before.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean,
let me do this. Let me pause for this one, and we'll get back with you guys with final thoughts when we come back in just a moment.